I really have an ambition that this podcast builds community. I want listeners to feel like they're part of something bigger, that they're hearing from other school leaders and thought leaders who are walking similar roads, facing similar challenges, overcoming obstacles together. Welcome to Trailblazing Schools, the podcast for educational leaders at the intersection of leadership, complexity, and intelligent technology. I'm Trudy Graham. This is a space for leaders navigating uncharted territory. We explore strategic leadership, ethical innovation, and how AI can strengthen the deeply human work of education. Episode 1. Let's go, Trailblazers. What does it take to lead well in a school right now? And is it actually sustainable? You know, I see school leaders grappling with acceleration of change and the complexity that it brings into the school environment. There's social shifts, political shifts, and of course what's happening on the technology front. And I see leaders over and over being asked to do more with less. There's greater demands for personalisation in learning, more requirements and deliverables meeting demands with inclusion. And at the same time, ironically, there's a teacher shortage. You can't get specialist staff, you can't get general staff or relief teachers, and often administrators are teaching while still holding leadership roles and meeting the demands of leading school communities. And of course, there's growing policy pressures too, right? And agendas around getting better results that show in the data, particularly of standardised tests and other measures that are held up as important. And this is all bearing down on leaders at the same time, where there's rising emotional load with mental health concerns for staff, students, and even the leaders themselves. So in this first episode of Trailblazing Schools podcast, I probably want to start with why this podcast and why now. It is an AI in education podcast that really isn't at all about the technology. It's about leadership. It's about the humans. It's about how the AI can actually make us be better humans, better leaders, better teachers. I really want to explore how AI can support leaders with school improvement and teachers with instructional decision making. And look, I've looked and I've listened across what's available out there. There are podcasts in the Australian educational landscape that are all about tech, and honestly, hardware comparisons and describing model upgrades, they're really not my thing. So you're not going to get that here. Rather than focusing on the apps and the platforms, I'd love to explore how AI can lighten workload, support your thinking, help improve clarity, and free leaders and teachers up to do more of the human work that matters. I really hope that this podcast is conversational and relational. It isn't about dazzling listeners with AI jargon or complicated tools. I really want it to be about honest talk, grounded leadership, and the real work of guiding schools through change. And of course, I want it to have an Australian and New Zealand heart. Of course, I'm going to speak with educators who are authors and speakers and thought leaders, but I also want stories and perspectives that will come from Australian and New Zealand school leaders in their contexts. I want to work across sectors, from public schools, religious schools, and independent schools, and really find and leverage the voices that are often not heard, voices from the field. Principals from small schools, regional schools, remote schools, as much as our metropolitan colleagues. I really have an ambition that this podcast builds community. I want listeners to feel like they're part of something bigger, that they're hearing from other school leaders and thought leaders who are walking similar roads, facing similar challenges, overcoming obstacles together. And of course, I want it to be practical, not theoretical. I'd love if every episode offered grounded strategies that leaders could actually take away and try tomorrow, not abstract leadership philosophy. Across this podcast, you'll hear leaders navigating complexity with courage and clarity. If you'd like to see how that looks in practice, visit trailblazingschools.com/field notes. These field notes capture real stories from school leaders using AI as a thinking partner, strengthening leadership, not replacing it. It's free, practical, and designed to prompt your own next step. You'll find it at trailblazingschools.com/field notes. So it's probably important that I set the scene. And one of the things that I do is use AI as a thinking partner. I see it as an invaluable leadership tool. And with that, I really want to model how leaders can use AI reflectively, not just operationally. Within each podcast episode, I'm going to ask guests to prompt AI with 2 questions that will be conversation starters in each episode and read it exactly as it's written. And with that, I thought it appropriate that I apply that to myself to introduce myself in this space and in this episode to you. So the first prompt that I've given my AI, and I happen to use ChatGPT, is, with everything you know about me, write a 100-word bio in a warm human tone. And I'll read the AI response as it's written. I haven't edited this. I'm Trudy Graham, an educational leadership coach, facilitator, and speaker who has spent 3 decades walking alongside school leaders in complex human work. I've been a teacher, a principal, and a regional leader, so I understand the weight of decisions, the pace, and the quiet responsibility leaders carry. My work sits at the intersection of thoughtful leadership, practical clarity, and ethical use of AI, not as a shortcut, but as a trusted thinking partner. I'm known for being calm, grounded, and deeply relational, helping leaders feel steadier, less alone, and more confident as they lead well when there's no clear map. I have to say, when I read that response to my prompt, it feels like a good place to begin. The next prompt is, as a guest on a podcast about trailblazing and leading into uncharted territory, what is the core message I want to leave listeners with? And again, without editing, ChatGPT said, the core message I want listeners to take away is this: you don't need a perfect map to lead well in uncharted territory. What you need is clarity about what matters, the courage to take the next right step, and the willingness to think differently about how you lead. Trailblazing leadership isn't about moving faster or having all the answers. It's about staying human in the middle of complexity, making thoughtful decisions with imperfect information, and creating the conditions for others to grow alongside you. Used well, tools like AI can support that work, not by replacing judgment, but by sharpening insight, reducing unnecessary load, and freeing leaders to focus on what only humans can do: care, connect, and lead with integrity. And I have to say, that's what the podcast is here to explore. Everything that follows comes back to that. So let me define how I think about trailblazing schools. And I love the thought of adventurers or explorers charting new territory, leading without a map. So what is it and what isn't it? And I have to say first that it's not about being first, and it's not about chasing every trend, and it's not about heroic burnout. We don't need Superman or Wonder Woman leading our schools. What it is about is courage, clarity, principled experimentation, and collective leadership. I have been known to say, no Superman or Wonder Woman, let's go with the Avengers, a team approach, right? Working off each other's strengths. I see a lot of leaders seeking confidence, and trailblazing might sound like a confident leader, but what we need is steady leadership within uncertainty. As I've said, leading without a map, but it's not without a compass. I actually think courage comes before confidence, and having the courage to make tough decisions under pressure when all the factors may not be evident. And rather than confidence, which implies certainty, what if we reframed that as trusting your judgment, or your experience or your professional knowledge to apply in decision-making circumstances. And then when it comes to clarity, what if that wasn't about having all the answers, but knowing what matters enough so that you're able to take the next step, even if it's a small one, in moving forward? So what could you expect from Trailblazing Schools podcast and the episodes that are coming? Well, I'll do more shows like this, solo shows, where I want to share my observations, my thinking, and my reflections around leadership at this time in schools and in education. I also, as I've already said, want to have conversations with school leaders, the practitioners in the field, that will keep it grounded and real. It'll also make it extremely relatable, right? And yes, there'll be educators as guests who are authors and speakers and thought leaders who've crafted their thinking into products and shared them in ways that we can learn from and consider and reflect on. But the other bit too is about real stories, not polished case studies. We're all learners in this space as we move forward. And one of the things that I advocate is that we learn from each other, share our practices so that we all collectively grow. And it's certainly fast moving. I feel like if I got Trailblazing Schools podcast right, it would start to feel like we're gathered around a campfire, sharing stories, learning from each other, building a sense of community and belonging. It would feel like a circle and that you're a part of a circle with shared moments and practical takeaways. If this conversation resonated and you're exploring how to strengthen leadership in your school, network or system, I invite you to connect. Visit trudygraham.com.au/connect to explore working together. If you're ready to move from insight to implementation, that's where we begin. And then where do I see AI in all of this? Well, I have to say, since OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November 2022, we really are witnessing the rapid adoption of large language models and the fast-paced developments with the technology. Really, it's not something educators can ignore. In my workshop, teachers and leaders easily identify artificial intelligence in their day-to-day life, and our students will not know a world without it. I do see AI as a thinking partner, a collaborator. It's a sense-making tool, and it's something that can support judgment and decision-making, not replace it. In education, we have multiple responsibilities as a leader. Firstly, there's building your own capability and working with artificial intelligence tools. Then there's provision for your staff professional development, so they're well-skilled, capable and confident. There's considerations and impacts with pedagogy and the potential of personalised learning. There's decisions around student access and their use of the tools. There's curriculum commitments and what is to be taught around artificial intelligence. And there's also a considered piece around leadership broader across the community and how schools can inform and play a role in that space. So as I wrap up this episode, I want to also share my closing ritual questions that I will put to my guests. And again, I think it's appropriate that I answer them in this first episode. These questions aren't about work. They're about being human. I'm putting them in here to bring a sense of connection, relationships, and interest. So the first one is, what's the best kept secret about where you are? And I have to say that I'm actually based in Rockhampton in central Queensland, and I believe that where I live gives me the best of both worlds. I have all the convenience of a large regional city with a relaxed rural lifestyle. Think dogs, horses, kangaroos on my morning walk are not uncommon. I describe where I live as having the Great Barrier Reef at my front door and the Great Queensland outback at the back door. The next question is, what's a book or film you'd recommend and why does it matter to you? And after giving this some thought, I'd have to say Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's been a pivotal book It was one that I read early in my own leadership journey many, many years ago. And it's still one I refer to often in my work with other leaders. And in fact, I was referring to it just this week. So I'd have to put that in this space because it's a classic. And the last question is, what brings you comfort or joy at the end of a long week? And here, this was an easy one. I just love soaking in my bathtub. I think it's all about the water element, to be honest. And I'll have to tell you that it's not just the end of the week. I love it most weeknights. It's also my go-to when I'm unwell. So that brings me to close out this first episode. I have to say, if this has resonated, I'd love you to stay here with me. Follow or subscribe so this conversation can continue. And if you know of another school leader who might appreciate this conversation, feel free to pass it on. Until next time, take care. You've been listening to Trailblazing Schools with me, Trudy Graham. If this episode brought someone to mind, share it with them. You'll find further reflections, practical resources and leadership tools in the show notes. Until next time, lead with courage, seek clarity and keep trailblazing.